This is part 1 for the read-along for Unit 3.06, Impressionism 2 with quiz. Impressionism 2. Impressionist artists were influenced by the dramatic ways that Japanese woodblock prints depicted everyday life. Edgar Degas and Mary Cassatt incorporated the bold colors, diagonal lines, and bird's-eye view of Japanese woodblock prints into their Impressionist paintings and pastel drawings. Be sure and download the student guide PDF, which is here, as you go through the content on your own. Explore Impressionism and Japanese art. As you read through the lesson, use the student guide to take notes about each screen. You may also make quick sketches of the images to go with your notes. Japanese influence on Impressionist art. Commodore Matthew Perry of the U.S. Navy probably never realized the impact that he had on art. But by forcing the isolationist leaders of Japan to open their country to Western influences in the 1850s, Perry allowed the genius of Japanese art to make its way to Europe and America. So before the 1850s, Japan was pretty much closed off to everyone. They were closed off to Western countries, so America, Europe. They didn't want to trade with Western countries. They didn't want to do business with Western countries. They didn't want visitors from Western countries. And this guy, Commodore Matthew Perry from the U.S. Navy, forced them to open up to Western influences. And whenever he did that, he allowed Japanese art to come out into the Western world. So we got to see Japanese art for the first time. Ironically, the French planners of the 1867 Paris World's Fair did not see fit to exhibit works by their own Impressionist artists, but they did make room for Japanese woodblock prints. Impressionist painters flocked to the exhibit and were deeply moved by what they saw. So in 1867, Paris had this thing called the World's Fair, which is like a big, sort of like the Tri-State Fair that we have here. So it had lots of exhibition spaces for people, for businesses to show what they were doing. It was a way for Paris to show off to the world all the cool stuff that was going on in Paris and in France. And they didn't show their own Impressionist works because we've talked about they didn't really like the Impressionist painters, but they did show these woodblock prints that had come in from Japan. And the Impressionist painters went to the exhibit, saw these prints, and were blown away by what they saw. This was totally different from anything they had seen before. Master printmakers of the Ukiyo-e school in Japan depicted quiet scenes of everyday life in striking, highly decorative ways. Ukiyo-e prints celebrate the fleeting pleasures of life. The Impressionists were excited to discover such a different way of capturing transient moments that have universal themes. So, we have prints from the Ukiyo-e school in Japan that are showing everyday life in striking, highly decorative ways. So it's not super realistic, it's decorative. They celebrate the fleeting pleasures of life. So things that don't last very long, but that give us pleasure, like a really beautiful day outside, or maybe a beautiful cherry blossom tree that only has flowers on it for a few days, and then the flowers fall and the petals blow away. Things like that don't last very long but are very pleasurable. The Impressionists were excited to discover such a different way of capturing transient moments that have universal themes. Transient, again, meaning not lasting very long, but that have universal themes. Universal meaning everyone can appreciate them. Ukiyo-e prints, Window to Another World. Woman Grimacing in Mirror at Baby on Floor by Kitagawa Utamaro is another Japanese ukiyo-e woodblock print. Flat, solid color with no shading fills simplified shapes and delicate patterns add interest to some areas. The limited colors create a sense of unity as they repeat in the print. So we've got flat, solid color with no shading. It's mostly these black areas of the print. Simplified shapes, meaning that not every single detail is necessarily shown on here. It's just simple shapes. Like, for example, if this woman had a stray hair going off of her bun, it's not shown here. It's simplified shapes, so made more simple. And delicate patterns add interest to some areas. So these patterns on the woman's kimono and on this piece of fabric draped over the screen. The limited colors create a sense of unity as they repeat in the print. So this print is unified because this kind of peachy color is in this woman's kimono, it's in this kimono and fan, it's in the decorations in her hair, and it's on the clothes that the baby is wearing. And then the black, of course, repeats throughout the print as well. So it all kind of goes together because of that. The print has a flattened sense of space and gives the impression that the viewer is above the scene, gazing at the figures from an elevated vantage point. The artist created asymmetrical balance by placing the subject off-center with empty space on the left side and by cropping the nearest figure off the edge of the print. Techniques like those draw the viewer into the scene. Impressionists such as Edgar Degas and Mary Cassatt applied characteristics of Japanese ukiyo-e wood prints to their own work, energizing their compositions. So the print has a flattened sense of space, meaning that it doesn't look like it goes really far back into the background, right? Everything's sort of flattened together. This woman looks very close to this screen, which looks very close to this woman, and this baby looks very close to this vanity table. Everything looks very close together. Nothing is spaced out very far. We have the impression that as the viewer, we're sort of above the scene, gazing at the figures from an elevated vantage point. So we're looking at them from a place that's a little up above them. The artist created asymmetrical balance by placing the subject off center. So asymmetrical meaning not even on both sides. In this case, it's because everything is off on the right. There's space over here on the left where there's not anything going on. And by cropping the nearest figure off the edge of the print, so this woman, we can't really see her feet or the rest of her kimono because they go off the edge of the print. Techniques like these draw the viewer into the scene, and impressionists such as Edgar Degas and Mary Cassatt applied characteristics of Japanese ukiyo-e prints to their own work, energizing their compositions. So they saw this and they said, we're going to take some inspiration from what the Japanese artists are doing, and we're going to do similar things in our paintings. Explore Japanese ukiyo-e prints activity on the next screen to view this print more closely. So be sure and come in and click through this on your own time and learn a little bit more about this print. Edgar Degas. One impressionist who was strongly influenced by Japanese woodblock prints was Edgar Degas, born in Paris in 1834. The son of a successful banker, he attended the well-respected École des Beaux-Arts, where he excelled in draftsmanship. Degas most admired the work of Jean-Auguste Ingres, a neoclassicist who painted exquisitely detailed historical works, such as the portrait of Napoleon shown here. Degas set his sights on following the neoclassical tradition. He traveled to Italy and copied works by Renaissance painters. So, Edgar Degas, who we're talking about, He saw those Japanese woodblock prints that we've been talking about, and he took a lot of inspiration from them. He was born in Paris in 1834. His dad was a very successful banker, and Degas attended the well-respected École des Beaux-Arts, which is an art school in Paris. It's the art school in Paris. That's where that's basically where you wanted to go to school if you wanted to be an artist back then. Where he excelled in draftsmanship, which is drawing. So it's drawing accurately. Degas most admired the work of Jean-Auguste Ingres, who was a painter who did historical works, so things from history, such as the Napoleon portrait that is shown here. So this isn't by Edgar Degas, this is by an artist that he really admired. So Degas wanted to learn to paint like this, and he went to Italy and started copying works by Renaissance painters to learn how to paint like they did. In 1865, Degas met Impressionist artists and admired how they painted scenes from everyday life with dazzling light and color and loose, rapid brushstrokes, capturing fleeting moments in a compelling new way. Degas collected some of those Impressionist paintings, and his discussions with the artists changed the way that he thought about art. He became more interested in observing the modern world around him and began to use bolder lines and color to show it. So he thinks he has his life figured out, right? He wants to be a neoclassical painter and paint historical scenes the way the Renaissance masters and his favorite artist did. And then in 1865, he meets these Impressionists, and he really admires the way their work looks, and he admires what they're doing and how they're doing it. So he collected some of the paintings. We don't know if he bought them or maybe he traded for them. And he talked to the artists about what they were doing and why. And they changed his mind about how he felt about art. So after meeting the Impressionists, he becomes interested in looking at the modern world that's around him. Instead of painting scenes from history, he now wants to paint the modern world. And he wants to use bolder lines and bolder color to show it. So this is a big step for Edgar Degas.